pretty loud voice, so I can
Yeah, you do.
carry it if you can't. I want to begin
There we are.
sharing some names for us to hold. Menor Yasir Suazo Sandoral of Honduras. Miguel Luna of El Salvador. Jose Minor Lopez of Guatemala. Alejandro Hernandez Fuentes of Mexico. Dorian Raniel Castillo Cabrera of Guatemala. These are the names of men with stories that may be very similar to the story we just saw, who lost their lives just this last week in the Baltimore Bridge collapse. Let's hold those names and remember those lives. Take a moment. We are so glad to be here with you tonight. My name is Jennifer McLaughlin. I work as Senior Program Manager for Youth and Education at International Rescue Committee. I will introduce my colleagues, and then we have a couple of questions we're going to have a dialogue about, and if there are questions at the end, we'll hope to have a little time to receive questions. Suzanne Tierney sits to my left. Suzanne is our ESL and Civics Coordinator. It mentioned on the brochure that she was our immigration manager. Our immigration manager was not able to be with us tonight. Next to Suzanne is Yusuf Onyx Bukenya. Yusuf Onyx serves as our employment specialist, but is also the founder of Maripa in Kenya, an LGBTQ shelter for refugees. And next to Onyx is Janet Gwillem. Janet is our managing attorney for our children's legal services. That is for the undocumented children and unaccompanied minors that come across the southern border. And lastly, we have Angie Muthi. Angie is our Survivor Services Director. So Angie oversees all of our programs with folks who have survived all sorts of different things. In the play tonight, we saw the portrayal of how immigration status affects stability. Panelists, can you speak to the instability created by immigration pertaining to housing, domestic violence, labor trafficking, or access to higher education? Angie, would you begin?
Sure.
Maybe on the bottom.
Thank you. So as Jennifer said, I support our Survivor Services Department, and we work with survivors of harm, and in that department it's made up of our anti-trafficking team, our family wellness, which is survivors of other harm, and then our unaccompanied children who have been released to their sponsors. So, can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Oh, I can repeat it since we really have this spoken mic.
So the question is, speak to the instability that is created by immigration pertaining to housing, domestic violence, labor trafficking or access to higher education?
So I can speak a little bit towards labor trafficking. I think one of the things that we notice in the play is the constant fear because of status. And so if you think about the last time you went and filled out a housing application and you were asked for your information, and for those of us who are privileged not to have the right immigration status, it's not a problem. We don't think about our social security number or whether we have, what type of identification we have. And so for the housing component, when we're working with clients or whose immigration status is undocumented or are in different stages of getting their immigration status. For instance, when we're working with anti-trafficking survivors, who are going through the process of getting their T visas, they haven't gotten their work documentation, work authorization documentation, or they haven't gotten their social security card. So they're in fear, they're in this sort of limbo where they can't work because they don't have the documentation, and they can't apply for rental assistance or housing because they don't have the correct status. So there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of barriers that they come across. And so it is the idea that you have to have the right papers. But there's a lot of progress that's happened, and we have a lot of different services that provide housing for undocumented, or that you're able to, you're going through your TV's application, that you're able to, at certain points, get housing or get work authorization. And so I think the biggest barrier is just that fear of having to go through deportation, that fear of being found out, the fear of being taken back. And so it's very limiting to that. But we work with survivors so that we are making sure that they go through the right panels.
Thank you, Angie. Suzanne?
Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Yeah, I'm Suzanne, and I work with people that are trying to get their citizenship, naturalization, by teaching them the civics component of the interview, as well as English language skills that are needed to pass the citizenship test. And I would like to speak to the aspect of access to higher education and how your status, your immigration status, greatly affects your access to higher education. I think I've heard it said before that you can consider it in 3 areas, and it would be policy and access and perception. So first of all, people that are undocumented simply don't have access to financial aid, grants, and federal financial aid that's available to most young people that are applying to college. And then there's the access list. For example, if you're undocumented and don't have a social security number, you're not eligible to apply for scholarships even. We saw in the play, for example, that the young man was actually very good in school and got great grades, but so perhaps, had he been documented, he had access to scholarships to help pay for his higher education, but the fact that he didn't have a social security number means that he's not eligible for any of those scholarships. And the last piece is really something internal, an internal factor of perception. If these undocumented people don't feel like they belong, they just have that much more of a challenge to overcome, and therefore do not have ample access and opportunity. Their instability creates a lack of access to higher education.
Thank you so much. So real families are impacted by all of the things that we saw on stage tonight. So panel, tell me a little bit about how you see real families and real people impacted by the intersection of immigration and LGBTQIA identity. or immigration and family dynamics. Onyx, can you go first?
Hi everyone, I'm Onyx Bukayan. I work as an employment specialist at IOC, and I'm the founder. MAREPA stands for Marginalized Refugee Empowerment Program. This is located in Kenya, Nairobi. It's a shelter for LGBTQIA refugees who get evicted from their apartments just because of their sexual orientation. So, you got me to help me? My introduction was still up, so can you repeat that?
Sure. So how do you see real people and families impacted by the intersection of immigration and their LGBTQIA identity?
Okay, so on the side of the migration part, in Africa, let me start from there. So in Africa, when you wake up and come out, say, okay, I'm gay, I'm bisexual, then the first thing that happens, you expect your family to speak. And the family may come up with three parts. One, you alone, the bigger number of the family, they're like, no, it can't happen. And then they're like, those people are like, maybe that's what he choose, but they still can't say it's his right, it's their right, no, because they are afraid of the bigger family and then the community. So when this happens, you find yourself in a situation where you don't fit and you have to run away. And when you run away, the other worst part is, let's say you had a kid. When you go seeking for asylum, things like that, and the people who are working on you to register you as a refugee or an asylum seeker, they also part of, they also come up like, you say you're okay? Like, yeah. Why do you have kids? You mentioned you have kids. So some people, they get separated from their family, and then they get separated from their family again, from their kids. For example, there's so many people who go seek asylum, but they leave their kids behind because they are afraid that when I go to register me as somebody who's seeking asylum, they're gonna start judging me. Why do you have a kid? How do you get kids? They are sensitized not to do this, but that thing of feeling like it's not right, it keeps chasing them, so they ask some personal questions. So you find that people run away and they leave their kids in danger. So it's definitely, it just separates family from day one.
So much judgment.
Yeah, too much judgment. I think it's just being ignorant kind of, and too much culture thing, because it's not like here in the US or in Western countries. In Africa, when you come out, if your dad doesn't take care of that to chase you out from the community, anybody in the community will be like, hey, we don't need this person in our town. They need to go. And then sometimes some dads, some parents will be like, I don't care. And then the people at the community, they start judging him. They're like, oh, even maybe you're one of them. So you find that your dad he cannot attend any party around the town. He cannot stand with other people in a meeting to mention something. What are you saying? You don't have to say anything. So sometimes they are forced because Africa is just culture. Everything is around culture, not like family based. Yeah, so too much judgment, a lot of things going on there.
And Janet?
Yeah, so talking about intersection between all of these issues and family and family separation and the children, there was a couple of things that have come to mind to me. One was the play was a big reminder, did a really good job about describing the narrowing of the world that a child goes through when they're undocumented. They might start off, B, the character in the story, starts off as a 7-year-old, and when he came to the U.S. And, but at that time he was just going to school, his mom was working, probably didn't realize what his status really meant. But as he got older and he's watched what his mom was going through, and as he got approached that age of 18 and graduating from school, then the world gets closed more and more and more. He probably couldn't have gotten a driver's license unless they were living in Washington State, but they weren't, I don't think. And he didn't have work authorization, he couldn't get financial aid, like Suzanne was saying, he couldn't go to college. He was afraid to even jaywalk because he would end up in detention. He just didn't want to have any kind of contact with the police. So just showing how that world of a child, what goes from being a child, undocumented young child, all the way up into an adulthood, just closes and narrows that. The other thing, big theme there was the whole family separation. So like what Onyx was talking about, that can happen in like for an LGBTQ family separating if they have children, or if being separated, kicked out of their family. There's just separation is like the theme of immigration, period, all the time. I work with unaccompanied immigrant kids. All of them are separated from their families, whether it was done by somebody or because they had to leave their country and come alone to the United States. They're away from their families. So there's that geographic separation. There's, what was in the news during when Trump had separated all those kids from the family at work, which it's not the first time that's happened. That has happened throughout the history of immigration. It's still happening now, but not in the numbers that was happening, not as a policy across the board like what was happening back then. But it's part of our whole definition of what is family. And now if a child is traveling with somebody and coming across the border and they're not with their parents, they will be separated from those adults who they might consider to be their family. But I have clients that were traveling with, from Ukraine and across the southern border with an adult sibling and the sibling's family, and were separated because they weren't with the parent. And the child was detained until they could vet and release the child to another family member. So that's just part of the course of what happens. Also, deportation itself is a family separation, right? They might pick up a parent and deport them, and their family is left behind. Just not having that ability to sponsor and reunite families. You notice in the play, B gets this idea, well, maybe he will go back to his mom because right now, as it is, he can't visit mom and mom can't visit him because if either of them do that, well, mom can't get back into the country, and if he leaves the country, he won't be able to come back in either, right? So mom can't come to visit him. He can go visit mom, but he will never come back. So there's that whole thing of who can bring people here and who can stay here and all of that. And one other theme that from this whole play that really gets me, this is the third time I've seen it, Henry doesn't acknowledge that that privilege that he has of, he could get to travel if he did move back to B's country. He could go in and out of the United States, but of course he would still be living in hiding because of the relationship, but not, but the travel part, they could be together. So.
So many impacts, right? Impacts that we are often not even aware of. So what is one thing that you want to address that has changed or has not changed since the setting of this play, which was 2001 to 2006? Suzanne, do you want to speak about the interviews?
Yes, the fact that in the play they were practicing for an interview, I think that has changed a little bit. I think that now that the Department of USCIS has been created, they're doing more instead of the personal interview. They're having people that are married for people that aren't citizens, then they're having to document a lot more ahead of time, having to prove that they had a quote-unquote bona fide marriage. So they're requiring them, rather than prepare for this interview with an officer, that they have to submit a lot of evidence prior to becoming a citizen.
Yeah, I also noticed that Massachusetts was the first state to legalize same-sex marriage. That was 2003. Then followed by Washington. Washington also legalized it in November 2012, I think. So that was good step to start making people feel or live the life they want to live. So that was incredible. I think you can also mention some other things that changed since then.
Yeah, with it. So for LGBTQ, there was passed, when DOMA was struck, the Defense of Marriage Act was struck down by the Supreme Court. That's at the same time that what was part of that is basically saying that all federal benefits had to be granted to people in same-sex marriage, just as they would in any other marriage. And so that applied to immigration benefits. So that's a huge difference. Though I do want to point out that one of the rules for sponsoring a spouse is you have to have a marriage that is legal in the place that you get married. And not so many places in the world can you do that. So it just definitely benefits those who can, in places in Europe and such, where you can get married legally, then you can go through that sponsorship, and it's still not available for everybody else, though they can get a fiancé visa. So, yeah. Other things that have changed, I wanted to talk about DACA a little bit. So the deferred action for childhood arrivals, the Dreamers, they talk about being the Dreamers in here. A little bit of history there. For many, many years now, decades, Congress has been trying to pass some kind of version of the DREAM Act to help those kids that came here when they were young, when they didn't choose to come here, but they were brought to the United States, and to help them gain status and eventually become permanent residents and then maybe U.S. citizens. That has never passed, and so that's when President Obama did the executive order for deferred action for childhood arrivals. After Obama did that, and that's just a temporary, it's not even a status, it just gives basically saying, okay, we aren't going to deport you, we'll give you a chance to have work authorization, and you can apply for college in certain ways and have some benefits that way, but it's no long-term solution. It doesn't give status, doesn't give a path to citizenship. Because that's about as far as a president in an executive order could go. That got stalled out by the courts. So currently where we're at now, we're still stalled out by the courts. President Trump tried to eliminate it. The courts stopped the elimination of it, but just said those who had it could maintain it. But President Biden tried to expand it and get it going again. That's been stalled in the courts. So it's really only those people that were able to sign up during that initial period under President Obama that had DACA. But that is a change since then. Okay.
Thank you so much, panelists, for sharing your great knowledge from the work that we do with so many clients. So few refugees actually make it to a resettlement nation. Most refugees end up in a bordering country for the rest of their lives in refugee camps and don't make it. But even when people do make it here, it's not an easy transition because even if their spouse and their children were able to come with them, grandma and grandpa aren't here, the cousins, the the adult siblings, the aunts and uncles, the extended family that was so much a part of life in their home country are likely not here. It's a challenging reality. I think we are at time. If we have one question, I think we have 5 minutes. Okay, so if we have one question, we could go ahead and take one question from the audience. Yes.
Could you, the kids that are coming into the United States, hi, my name is Guillermo Gomez. The kids that are coming now to the United States that are not affected by this law, are they eligible to any kind of benefits of their DACA or not?
So you're talking about undocumented kids
Yes.
who make it into the United States. If there are some small groups of immigration status that they can apply for. Unaccompanied kids in particular too, they may be able to apply for asylum if they have a fear of return and they fit the 5 criteria that you have to have for asylum. Another application that we do a lot is special immigrant juvenile classification, which is for kids who've been abused, abandoned, or neglected by their parents. And it involves going into a state court, and they have to be have a valid reason for being in state court. So they're going through like a dependency or a guardianship process. They have to have an adult that's going to be taking over for them. And then they get a state court order and they apply to the immigration service with that. So there are sometimes trafficking has happened to those children. And if they're a survivor of trafficking, they might get a trafficking visa, or if they've been a victim of a crime. Those are kind of the 4 top areas that of benefits that they can apply for. But there's a lot of kids that aren't eligible for any of those. Yeah.
Is that number increasing?
Is that number increasing? Yeah. Do you want to say? Yeah.
Yes, the number is increasing. So with unaccompanied children, any of the children that are in Washington State, once the children come in and they are taken out of order, they're taken to detention, but then they're released to a sponsor, or a huge percentage of them are released to a sponsor. And that sponsor could be a relative from their hometown, their own parents, or just a friend from their hometown. And that number is increasing. Thinking from the top of my head, I know that just this year we're in just around the end of March, and we have at least over 550 children that have come in that are in post-release services. So that number is increasing, but any of the children that come in are released to sponsors.
Yeah, the numbers have doubled since the beginning of the pandemic too. Yeah.
Children who are legally classified as refugees generally come from a select group of countries. So currently we mostly see people coming from Afghanistan. After the United States 20-year war there, we developed a lot of partners that supported the United States military and government presence in Afghanistan. And those people were all in danger from the Taliban once the Taliban took over. So most of the Afghan people that are resettling here were friends of the United States in Afghanistan amidst the war. And that is why they are here. But they are also here with their spouses and children and sometimes parents. So amazing to remember what good friends those people are and how they put their lives in danger for the future of their country. We also see a lot of people coming from Ukraine, clearly because of the war happening there. We see a lot of people coming from Congo and Somalia and Syria, sort of a set number of countries where we see people most often coming from. Those kids do have a lot more rights. They have the ability to apply for financial aid and receive Pell Grants and receive financial assistance to go to college. So those are the students that I work with. We serve 930 refugee students in 8 school districts across Washington State. Just in one academic year, we provide services in the school day, after school, and virtual programs to provide trauma-informed social emotional support and linguistic support, as well as additional academic coaching and career planning, career placement services, things like that. All right, such a wonderful show this evening to open our hearts, open our minds to understand the situations that so many of our neighbors in our community experience that we don't understand, that we are not aware of. And really appreciate your interest in joining the conversation. Appreciate the Seattle Rep for hosting this and giving us a chance to learn more about our neighbors and how we might remember when we look around and see the refugees that are here. What I have learned, what I have discovered, is that most of the refugees that are here are the brightest, the strongest, the most intelligent, the best leaders in their home country. And they are here because they have the resources to make it through the systems that are not easy. So remember that, when we see people that are newcomers to this nation, that they are special people that made it here, and they are very much in the minority of refugees. One last thing I'll mention is climate change is very much a part of refugees' plight. We know that most countries that have conflict occurring currently also have water shortages. So countries that are dealing with a lack of sufficient water tend to be in conflict, and people are displaced as a result. So that is one of the realities that we live with, and we have to learn how do we as a world respond to that. That is the work that we do, and coming alongside and companioning people on the journey. It is not an easy process, and I think this play did a wonderful job of exhibiting that for us all. Thanks everyone for coming out tonight.